my screen and working through the presentation. Would you like me to start that now and get that set up?
Sure, you can start sharing it if you'd like. Yeah. Looks good.
And my presenters, if I'm not moving, if you need, just say next slide if I'm not quite on top of it, please.
Sounds good. Thanks, Devin.
Thank you, Devin.
No problem.
And so the session goes to about 11:10. So I'll chime in at about 11 just to remind you about Q&A unless you decide to go into it earlier. For folks in the audience, we'll get started in about 2 minutes at 10:20. And it looks like we've got it in the Q&A a message that chat is disabled. I do know that we want the questions to go to Q&A if possible, but I'm not sure if we want to get chat turned on for folks too, though, just to talk.
Would you like chat on?
I think so, yeah.
I think I set it so that, okay, panelists can chat with everyone and attendees can chat with, do you want attendees can chat with hosts and panelists or everyone?
I think everyone's okay.
Can someone test can an attendee test the chat now? Just say hi.
Looks like it's on. Awesome.
Hi.
And it is 10:20, so perfect. So welcome everyone to the first session of day 1 of the 2023 North American Virtual Reference Conference. I'm Sarah Pate, coordinator of the ASCWA statewide virtual reference cooperative here in Washington State. And I'll be your moderator for the following session, along with my colleague Leah Dodd at Cornell. Attendees, your video and audio have been turned off for the session, but if you have a question for the presenters, please use the Q&A section. There will be time allowed at the end of the presentation for questions. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our website, the conference website, within the next month or so. And for this session, Innovating and Adapting Reference Services to Serve Resident Students Incarcerated in Idaho, we are joined by 3 staff members and 1 student from the University of Idaho. Devin, Jylisa, Grace, and Perri, please introduce yourselves and take it away.
I'll go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Jylisa Kenyon, and I am the social sciences librarian at the University of Idaho, and I will pass it on to Grace.
Hi, my name is Grace. I am a former Prison Education Initiative intern and currently the Prison Education Initiative intern. I'm a U of I alum. And yeah, I think that's about it.
And my name is Perri Moreno. I'm a reference instruction librarian, and I'm part of the first year experience program at the University of Idaho.
And I'm Devin Becker. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Instruction at the University Library. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here today, everyone. We're really excited to talk with you about our project to adapt and serve our resident students who are incarcerated in Idaho. Next slide, please, Devin. So first, we just want to acknowledge everyone at our university who's helped make the IDOC resident library possible. This includes Dr. Omi Hodwitz, who's an associate professor of criminology, as well as our colleague in the library, Kristen Henrik, who is an associate professor and copyright and open scholarship librarian. We also want to thank all of the PEI project interns, including Grace, who's not listed here since Grace is presenting with us. This project wouldn't be what it is without the work of these student interns. So we're very grateful for them and all of the work that they've done so far. Next slide, please. What we're going to talk about today is the Second Chance Pell Grant, which was the impetus for this partnership between the library, the PEI student interns, as well as Omi Hodwitz. We're then going to talk about the PEI interns and what they do, the IDOC resident library ecosystem that we created to serve the information needs of these resident students, the Request More Sources workflow that reference librarians developed in collaboration with Devin and Grace and the other PEI interns to serve the kind of in the moment information needs of these students. Then we'll close out on what didn't work out for us, some of our ongoing challenges, as well as what's next. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to take a second to talk about the history of the Second Chance Pell Grant, kind of how we got here today. In 1965, the federal Pell Grant was created to provide need-based funding for undergraduate students. This applied to everybody until 1994. Access to the Pell Grant was removed for incarcerated students as part of a larger crime bill. At that time, there were about 772 institutions that were offering degree programs, and by roughly 1997, only 8 institutions were offering college programs in prison. That pretty much remained the same until 2015. Pell Grant access was then restored as part of the FAFSA Simplification Act, but it was presented as a Second Chance Pell Grant experiment, which is a pilot program for select universities and prisons to begin degree programs. U of I applied to be part of the pilot program, and in 2022, we joined the Second Chance Pell Grant as part of the third round of experiments and began offering 3 degree programs in 2 prison facilities. Our 3 degree programs are communication, general studies, and organizational sciences. Our 2 facilities are 2 very unique facilities in Idaho. Idaho Department of Corrections has about 9 prisons across the state. We're offering degree programs at Idaho Correctional Institution Orfino, ICIO, and Pocatello Women's Correctional Center, PWCC. ICIO is located in Orfino, Idaho. It's a medium maximum facility with capacity for protective custody levels. It is also an all-male facility that is about 500 bunks in total. Pocatello Women's Correctional Center is in Pocatello, Idaho. It includes all custody levels and is an all-female facility. One key thing to note is that these 2 facilities have very different access to technology and the school. Both prisons have a school facility, however, Orfino's is much larger. It has an additional prison educator, as well as school clerks that are residents able to help facilitate some of the school activities. In addition, Orfino tends to have more technology access, including more computers, Chromebooks, etc. The PEI internship actually started before we received the Pell Grant and began in 2021. The PEI interns are responsible for many different projects. It's kind of a wide variety of things. A lot of it is self-initiated, depending on what your interests are and stuff. But one general thing that's maintained consistency is helping with the library. And so the PEI interns began working on this with the library in the spring of 2021, well into the summer. Lots of grunt work put in there, and then into the fall, and here we are today. Initially, part of what we needed was to figure out how we would provide research materials for incarcerated students. Generally, the only access in the prisons is typically Wikipedia, and opportunities for research and more material are very scarce. So initially, we had looked at required and recommended course readings from each of the courses offered as some of the initial prison education initiative courses, what the instructors were looking at. Additionally, topics of interest were identified from PEI interns. This was kind of generated from kind of a smattering of what the inside students were interested in, and then also what our non-incarcerated PEI interns had done for projects before, what are common topics that we see in classes such as like communication. And then additionally, and as our library developed more capacity and interest, we started looking at requests for more sources for course assignments. The PEI interns are mostly responsible for vetting the resources for the facility. Like I said before, we were pretty much stuck with Wikipedia and whatever fictional pieces were in the library, which is a pretty small physical library in the facilities. IDOC does have parameters for what material is safe within prison, generally avoiding sexual content, graphic violence, politically motivating material, information on gangs, and of course, instruction on how to commit crime. Though we certainly don't like to, censor material a ton, this is what we have to work with. Otherwise, there isn't much opportunity to bring resources in and out of the prison. So the PEI interns are responsible for making sure that our resources match IDOC parameters. This is, again, part of their internship, which they can take for 3 to 6 credits. To scan these materials, we look for kind of that list of general ideas, like, the sexual content, the graphic violence, stuff like that, as well as a trigger word list that we developed that has key phrases that would not be appropriate in the prison setting. Additionally, IDOC facility members may periodically audit materials to verify that they're approved for prison, just kind of follow the same process that the interns do. And I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Devin.
Sorry, I lost my Zoom controls as usual. So yeah, I was brought in on the project last spring, about a year ago, and I was partly that was because we developed a certain a platform here at the library called Collection Builder, and so I'm going to talk about the sort of socio-technical infrastructure for this project and how we've developed this library for the residents' scholarly needs. And earlier on in this presentation, I was going to show it at the end, but I figured I might as well just show it right now. And so this is so you have an idea of where we kind of ended up. And so this is our online version of the resident library. It is this is the home page that lets you get in via your courses or subjects. We have at this moment, I think, 514 items, and so you can see they're all PDFs of various sizes. And they are, tagged by title, creator, subject matter, item type, and many other pieces. Each one then has an embedded PDF that one can read or download once the resident student can read or download once they access it. We also have some subject sort of clouds, course clouds, timeline that lets you kind of look at the oldest to the most recent items, data table as well that lets you kind of download data and stuff if you'd like. But all of this is based on our work with the technology together with the people. And so we have this kind of, I'm going to walk through kind of how this all came together, how this comes together. But as you can see, I'm sort of really privileging, the people that work on this overall. So it starts with the data and objects. We have some workflows, and then we have an ecosystem of online repositories that we work with to make this all happen. And so these are the people that I'm working with as sort of the technical person for this project. The resident students are the users to whom we're hoping to make this most usable. The project directors, OMI specifically, making sure that this makes sense within their within their vision for the program. The classroom instructors themselves who can ask to add resources to the repository. The student interns who are just fantastic and have really done the majority of work for this project and have learned a lot, I hope, from the project. I've also, part of this is working with the government employees and officials that manage IDOC in the facilities and the means for access for the resident students. And then, of course, my fellow librarians who always get an exclamation point. So the data and objects, essentially, this is a spreadsheet-driven website. And it's really 3 spreadsheet-driven websites, but I'll talk about that too. So working with the student interns, we created this spreadsheet and the forms that they can fill out about each, a row for each item. And then we've also created a location that they can then, for the PDFs that they download from the databases, that they can upload, and that is GitHub, and I'll talk about that in a second. A big part of this is a sort of like, it's not an extensive training, but at least a one-time training session, and then communications that help with that and reinforce that training. So they receive that training prior to starting, and then within the spreadsheet themselves, there's links and information in the first row that contains notes on the fields they're entering. And then we also communicate via that spreadsheet, which you can see here. We have this vetted field. So once a student has finished this, they can go through and kind of check that out. And so I'm going to click into this as well. This is a copy of our template here. And so this is where the students work on this tab on this sheet, and they enter all this information. And they, and we come back in and check. And once these X's in the vetted piece are there, then we have another tab that is a little cleaner version and has the locations of where the objects actually go. So these are where the PDFs are actually located on the web. And then this is what we download and create the website from. So that's how that works. And you can see in that first row, there's information there if the students need that at the time of their work. Oh, sorry, I'm clicked it again. The other piece is the GitHub piece. And so this is based in a GitHub repository. There are actually 2 GitHub repositories we use. The one that the students use is where they upload the PDFs, and that's basically the extent of their work in GitHub. They push up, they sign into their accounts and push the PDFs to this account. You can see Wolf7574 and Grace's GitHub username here too, working across this from that would probably be June into November, adding these PDFs in kind of waves as we build out the site and update the site as well, because this is an ongoing process, and we need to make sure that those processes are set up as well. The development site, so the site I showed you initially is the kind of production site. There are 3 different sites here, as I've mentioned. This is what the development site looks like. It looks very similar. Right now we have 515 items in there because one item has not been vetted. That will, once it is vetted, we'll push it into the site itself. But that one is built on, all of these are built on a framework called Collection Builder. Collection Builder is a digital exhibit and digital collections framework that we've developed at the University of Idaho for the last 5 years. We've received funding from IMLS and NEH to build this platform. And as part of this platform, we have, usually we have these things called templates that we build off of. And so this one uses Collection Builder Sheets, which automatically connects to a Google Sheet. You just put in the link to the sheet and it will automatically build your website, as well as Collection Builder GH, which is our lightweight version of the platform. If you'd like to learn more about Collection Builder, this is the website for the project, collectionbuilder.github.io. And if one of my colleagues will put that in the chat, I'd appreciate that. And then on that site or at this URL here, we have quite a bit of documentation about how to use the site. And we're building that increasingly with a new grant from IMLS. Our kind of catchphrase for Collection Builder is you do the metadata, Collection Builder makes it work. And so Collection Builder kind of works with a spreadsheet, and we're kind of representing it here in this slide. The metadata CSV here, that's the spreadsheet that you typically download from a Google Sheet, a collection of objects, in our case, literally a folder called objects with a bunch of PDFs in it. And then this website, this repository itself, which is a Jekyll-based site. So it's a static site generator that works with this software specifically. Jekyll works across the objects and the metadata, it iterates over all of them and builds hundreds of websites, hundreds of actual pages, and interactive browsing capabilities. All the things that I showed are automatically built from the website, from the data itself. So it's a data-driven process. And so for this project, we worked with the 2 templates, the Google Sheets driven site, which is the pilot site for incarcerated students. And that one is still actually in development. We actually haven't kind of made it like widely released, although we hope to do so this spring. And then we used the Sheets version so that the interns can enter the information and then go check it on a website and make sure it looks correct. So they can do that without our intervening. They can, so they're working at night, they're working when, whenever their schedule's allowed, and they can always make sure that everything is working. The other piece is that we have this other template, the GitHub Pages template, that builds one online site that has 2 branches. So one builds an online site and one builds an offline site. And we'll talk about the reasons for building those 2. So there were sort of the challenges and opportunities. Well, we're going to talk about the challenges today. The main challenges kind of driving the development of this were copyright issues with the resources that that the student interns downloaded from mostly library databases, and then the limited internet computer access for resident students. In terms of the copyright challenges, we couldn't just and so reasons that I'm not like actually showing you the GitHub repositories and that site, we can't just make that available in the public because we'd be violating copyright laws. So we need to figure out a way to make that access limited to those students, to the resident students who are University of Idaho students, and therefore, should be rewarded with the access to the library databases. So we started off with different ways of doing that. We worked with encrypted PDFs, but that was a pain for both me and for the students using them. And then we worked with our university IT to create a proxied site access. So now the page that I demonstrated earlier, in order to access that page, you need to sign in with your Vandal, your University of Idaho ID and password. And so that's the exact same access requirements that any student here on campus would have to access a database from off campus or on campus. And so we feel like we're meeting those copyright requirements that way. The other issue that we worked with is the limited internet and computer access that the students actually have. And so we were required to scrub any externally pointing at URLs from our project. And we went through a safe listing process with the Idaho Department of Corrections, which took about a month overall. The students have access to the internet via their Chromebooks, but a lot of times those Chromebooks aren't available and they're often working in the labs. And so because they had, they would be working on the labs that do not have internet access. That's why we created this offline version. So the online version is the one I showed you. There's another branch through which I create essentially a folder that recreates the exact site, but that we deliver via zip file to the educators at these facilities via Google Drive. They download it, extract everything into a folder, and then they can place that on a local computer so that a student can just log onto that computer, click the index file, and open it up and have the site as though they were on the internet. This is a low overhead and has the same user experience, and it's a great learning opportunity for those times when they don't have internet access. So just to demonstrate what that looks like, this is the online version, and this is the offline version. And you can see here at the bottom, there's one piece missing, and that is the request more sources option that I think Jylisa is going to speak about as one of the major pieces that the reference librarians developed for this project.
Great, thanks, Devin. So I'm going to walk you through this request for more sources workflow. As Grace mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this library ecosystem kind of to start included those required and recommended readings, as well as potential topics of interest that the resident students themselves generated over the summer in collaboration with the interns, and that the interns had identified as potential topics that might be relevant for some of their assignments. But the key piece that was missing, and that we had talked about from our very early meetings in spring 2021, was giving resident students the opportunity and the ability to actually search for sources that are related to their own topic of interest, and not just to give them to them on a thumb drive, to actually help them develop some of the searching skills that those of us who work in libraries and specifically work at physical reference desks or virtual reference really see as beneficial for students as they're pursuing their college degrees. And so that's how the request for more sources workflow was born. We're going to step you through what resident students see, what reference librarians do, what PEI interns do, and then what Devin and his colleagues in data and digital services do throughout this workflow. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is just a screenshot. I'm going to show you screenshots of the form rather than opening up Qualtrics and going through all of this. Our submission form built upon the University of Idaho Library's current research assistance request form. It had very similar questions, but we had to change them to meet the needs of these students, as well as our lack of communication with them. Because of how the Idaho Department of Corrections works, students are able to submit a request form to us, but we cannot have any back and forth communication with them. So once they submit this type of request form, all we have is the information that they've shared. We can't ask follow-up questions. If someone didn't provide enough information about their topic, we're only able to work from the information that we have. Students could submit another request form if they wanted to, but there's no way for us to get in touch with them and say, we need more information or your sources are now ready. So the first thing we had to figure out with this workflow is how do we get students the sources that they're requesting for their topics of interest, and how do we let them know if we can't communicate with them? And what we decided on was having Qualtrics generate a randomized ID number for each request form, as well as ask students to share keywords or keyword phrases related to their topic within this request form. This randomized ID number and keywords, once they know that and they save that, we actually add them to the metadata for each item we find for a specific student, and it appears in that subjects area. So if a student remembers or writes down their randomized ID number, in 2 to 3 weeks, they can visit that library ecosystem, type that number into the search box, and see all of the sources that the librarians found for them and that the PEI student interns vetted. But we realized that a randomized ID number, I write things down on Post-it notes or on pieces of paper, that gets lost. We wanted another way for them to access these sources, and we came up with keywords. We suggest having keywords related to their topics, so they're easier for them to find, as well as future students who might be doing research on sleep disorders or climate change can find them too, but it can really be any keyword so long as it's not any identifying information. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of what we ask for. We ask for the student's name, what type of research request they're asking for. If they choose for a course, we ask for more information about the course and then when their assignment is due. One interesting aspect about this form is that when a student shares their name, only Perri and I see their name. That's because we've went through the IDOC security training. So Perri's going to talk about what reference librarians receive, but they don't see the actual student's name because of security and confidentiality concerns. Here is the remainder of the form where we ask them to describe their research topic. We give a few examples to help them. We ask them to choose those keywords that will help them find their sources later. And we also ask how many and what type of sources are they looking for. So far, for the requests that we've received, most students are interested in the scholarly or peer-reviewed articles for their assignments. We haven't had any requests for things where maybe they're being asked to use a book chapter. We would be able to potentially make a scan of a book chapter and make that available, but entire books are more challenging because of the access restrictions that Devin mentioned. Next slide, please. And then this is just the final slide that they see before they submit their request for more sources form. It reminds them of their randomized ID number as well as the keywords they chose. And then when they click next, they can download a copy, a PDF copy of the request they submitted in case they are able to access that on offline or online later. Next slide, please, Devin. So as I mentioned, there are 2 pieces of the submission form. Perri and I received version 1, which includes the resident student's name if they choose to share it, as well as all of the other questions. But then version 2 is sent to our reference desk email. That's anonymized and doesn't include the reference. It doesn't include the resident student's name, but it does include all of that relevant information that the librarian needs to actually perform this research assistance request. Next slide.
So once that form is submitted, it gets, as Jylisa mentioned, it gets sent to the reference librarians, and we receive that at our reference email. It's a centralized email that everybody logs into whenever they're at the reference desk. And so that form that they get is very similar to our research consultation forms. So they're very familiar for the things that they're very familiar to our librarians and that information that they're working with. So what happens is we receive that request, and whoever happens to be at the reference desk at the time will claim that request. So they are then in charge of finding those sources and then sharing them into a shared folder. That is so that we know who's in charge of it, and we have a folder in the email itself that we can move them into to know that it's claimed or not. librarians are free to email them to themselves. So if they can't work on it during their reference shift, they can then work on it back on their desk. We typically aim for within a week. In past experience, it hasn't taken that long for them to find those 10 sources, but that's what we aim for. So, because we tell the students a turnaround time of about 2 weeks. So we've got a week, and then the interns have a week to vet them. We aim for 10 sources because we want to make sure that the students have a variety of sources to work with. Many students don't actually need 10 sources, but with 10 sources, they have that ability to pick and choose within what they're looking for. And so we'll aim to find the ones that'll best fit their request. And once we find those sources, we save them to a shared folder. So we use Office products. So that shared folder is our reference desk emails OneDrive folder. And then that folder is then shared with all the reference librarians and the interns. So everybody who's working on this project has access to those materials that we've found. Devin, would you mind going to the next slide? So the librarians are in charge of finding those sources, and then we've got basic metadata that we enter before we send it on. So that basic metadata, we actually only enter the name of the file that we're using, and then the subjects and the ID number. You can see in that image the example of what the librarians do. You can see the start of the number in the subject sections. That's to make sure that the librarians are able to get everything completed in time. And then, so once that happens and everything's uploaded, we'll add that to our reference analytics. In our analytics, we'll put it in as an email request because we did get it in through our email, but we'll also make a note on it that it is from our resident students. And then what happens is we send that on, we'll email the interns and CC Jylisa and I, so we know where we are in the process. And then the interns will then start vetting the material.
So again, the primary responsibility of the PEI interns is to vet the subfolder items to ensure that they meet IDOC's content requirements. This includes the general ideas and then the trigger list we discussed above. We'll complete the rest of the metadata for each vetted item and then add the vetted PDFs to the library ecosystem through GitHub. So once that's all done, we'll email Devin, Jylisa, and Perri when the library ecosystem is ready to be updated. If the sources can't be vetted or don't meet IDOC standards, some cases it's just a matter of censoring a sentence or two. But if the material as a whole cannot be added to the library, we then contact Jylisa and Perri, who connect with Dr. Omi Hodwitz to figure out a solution.
Yeah, just to reiterate, once I get that vetted X, we re-ingest the CSV, we download the CSV and add it to the repository and rebuild the online site. Which is moved to the library web directory, which is, of course, only accessible via this proxy. And then we also rebuild the offline site via another branch, put that in, zip it, put it in a zip folder, and push the new zip file to a Google Drive folder where the educators at the facilities can download that and put that on their local computers.
So what didn't work out for us? So we were building the system from scratch. And so there was a lot of trying to figure things out. Partway through our process, we had already started the collection builder site and that library system. We found out that JSTOR has an access to prison system where it's basically the version of what we're doing with a bunch of JSTOR resources. They've got webinars and everything on it. Our coworker, Kristen Henrik, she emailed them twice and they never responded. So that was a disappointment. It would have opened way more opportunities for resources to our students, but we can only reach out and they did not reach back. Another problem is that unable to follow up and interact with resident students. So in cases like, hey, this topic, there just aren't any sources that will pass the vetting system. And so we have to use Omi Hodwitz, who is all the resident students advisor, as an in-between, which is more work on her plate because she already is doing a whole lot. But we also can't ask for clarification or say, like, do our normal reference interview type things where we can suggest, hey, maybe this topic won't work, but maybe you can adjust it this other way. And so there's a lot of problems that come with that. And so it's an ongoing challenge that we wish was better, but with the limitations that we're working within aren't great. we'll just have to work with what we got. And then also what's next. So there are a couple of things that we need to make sure to sustain is that PEI intern program, because they do a lot of that groundwork for us and make sure that it is actually happen. If that internship problem went away, we would have a problem. There's also the sustainability and effectiveness of the request more sources workflow. So currently we are in that pilot program. So there's a limited number of students who are currently taking classes. And so we actually haven't had an overwhelming number of requests, but once we get a lot more requests, is that this process going to sustain itself? Are we able to continue doing it as we are? And so we'll need to figure out as we get more requests, if it's still working or if we need to adjust things. And then there's also the scope of the ecosystem itself. So currently it contains class readings, research requests, and personal research. They do have resident students do have that ability to request information for their own personal research. Is that something that we want to continue doing? Do we have the ability to support that as we get more requests? So that's another thing we'll have to take into account. And then also transitioning from the second chance Pell Grant experiment. So the second chance Pell Grant experiment is the pilot program. And so it is actually transitioning into the prison education program, which is the full-fledged program, which is something we need to make sure is successful. It's more than a one-off thing. This is a continuing sustainable effort. So our contact information is on the screen. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about any of the details about any of this process. We're happy to share our work show documentation, things like that, if you end up needing to replicate it yourself. But also, if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them now.
Thank you all so much. We'll let folks put their questions in Q&A, preferably if they can, and you can do so anonymously or not. But I do have some questions to get us started, if you don't mind. And forgive me if I missed this at the beginning, but do you collaborate with the prison library staff?
Can I answer that? Sorry. Okay. So so the prison in Moreno, which is the larger of the two, does not have any staff. Resources are added by, by donations primarily, or materials that are brought into the prison and then vetted by correctional officers, typically. Usually the library staff are residents that are trained, at least to some extent, to kind of, organize and understand the materials. But that's about the extent of the resources. And actually that I can only speak to Orfino in that regard. I think Pocatello has, with all of the, the same pattern of less resources between staff, technology, library, et cetera. And then in addition to that, though, it also goes into the contact issue of like those clerks who do staff the library. Even if they are available, we can't reach back and forth with them. The prison in Orfino does have one prison educator, two prison educators, but that's about it in terms of like actual correctional staff.
Thank you. And I know at the beginning you shared a little bit of a timeline of the history of this project, but I think I just may have missed, like, how did the partnership form? Like, were you already working with the prisons and this was like an expansion? Was it something that like you read about and wanted to get involved in because you saw the expansion of the project, or how did that start?
University of Idaho has had a really solid relationship with Idaho Department of Corrections since about probably 2017, 2018. Dr. Omi Hodwitz began teaching the Inside Out, which is Inside Out, which is a prison exchange program where half of the classes are, or half of the students are incarcerated and the other half are traditional seated U of I students. That program started in 2018. It is an international program at this point. It's across the nation and in several other countries, but the classroom is Jill to dissolve some of the stereotypes surrounding prison, surrounding the incarcerated, and is a very mutually beneficial class. So we do that every semester since 2018. I'm actually the teaching assistant for the class for this is my third semester in a row. So that was where our relationship formed. Once the Second Chance Pell Grant became available, that was when we decided to expand. Particularly Omi Hodwitz decided to expand and apply for that.
Yeah, Omi had reached out to Jylisa and I, Jylisa because she was their subject librarian, and then I had attended a talk that Omi had given before about the Inside Out program, and I had asked about library resources and access to resources in that. So when Omi was thinking about this, the Second Chance Pell Grant and providing resources in this expanded way, she reached out to both of us, and then we roped in Devin and Kristen to help us make this possible.
And the library is just kind of one piece of the Second Chance Pell Grant experience. A number of other offices on campus are doing similar things and having similar discussions. We have like the Center for Disability Access and Resources, admissions, the registrar. So Omi and the student interns and others have been working with those other campus units too, to make sure that students have access to all of the information that they need. So the library is just one part of the larger program.
Thank you. So now we have a bunch of questions rolling in. So I'll start with the first one I see here. Someone is asking about the program that your school has for formerly incarcerated students on the campus as well. Like you have a program like that.
I can also field that as well. This is something that is actually a really reoccurring conversation at the moment. At this point, depending on the type of offense, formerly incarcerated students aren't typically allowed on campus. However, this is something that, again, is really prevalent in the dialogue, is subject to change, because as we transition from the Second Chance Pell Grant experiment to the prison education program, some of the stipulations of the prison education program require opportunities for returning citizens or formerly incarcerated people. So at this point, and again, also because we just started last semester with classes, this isn't something we're experiencing firsthand, but gearing up for and looking for a solution. So at this point, not quite, but in the future, hopefully.
Thank you. Another question. Let's see. How often are the students given access to library materials?
So you can go ahead if you want.
I was gonna say that you're probably more in the know for that, how often they have access to like their library or their Chromebooks.
This is something I actually don't know the access or the answer to. I do know the classroom and the library are in the same space. So if the classroom is not open, if the prison educator is not available, typically the library is not open. I do believe it's open 4 days a week. I could be wrong. And the hours vary, but it also depends on the custody level. And this is just for, Pocatello, I personally don't know. Orfino, for context, is the prison. I'm in the prison every week. I've never been to the Pocatello facility, so that's why I kind of have more information on Orfino and Orfino alone. But it does depend on custody level. For example, protective custody has no access to the library or only has access to stuff like the rec yard for typically maybe an hour a week because the custody level is so extreme. So it just depends. There's no clear answer.
Thank you. Another question. Do the classroom educators provide you information about the course content to inform likely topics or requests, especially since you can't do a reference interview beyond the forum?
As of yet, the course instructors have not worked with the librarians to kind of figure out what those topics are. Over the summer, I know that a number of them were reaching out to Grace and the other interns with topics that they had seen students do previously. And so I was able to work with Grace to find kind of do the library side of that, pulling the sources together and sending them to Grace and the interns to vet over the summer. But as of yet, we really haven't had that collaboration with course instructors. And I think moving forward, that's something that would be great, especially as the program transitions away from the experiment to the actual prison education initiative program, where we will see more classes. One of the things is that a number of the classes right now are more at the introductory level. So most of us have performed kind of reference interviews or worked with students, or even went into classes taught by those faculty to do a library instruction session. So we have a kind of a good idea of maybe the level of the source that's being looked for, but we really haven't had any discussions about potential topics of interest or content.
And are your interns MLIS students, or are they from other programs?
They're all criminology students. Yeah, the internship is offered through Department of Culture, Society, and Justice, and mostly the criminology program. I will also, on the previous question, I would also like to add that usually at least one intern attends like faculty onboarding, when we meet with a faculty member to discuss, you know, what they can have in their course materials, what the needs of the prison are, technology limitations, stuff like that. And usually during that time, we offer like ourselves as like, hey, like, you know, we're working on building this repository. If you have anything, even if it's a short list of topics, please send it our way. And then that's when we communicate to Jylisa. So we do have that connection there.
And how do incarcerated folks get involved in the program? Is there like a big application process and they're accepted like kind of regular college, or what does that look like?
It's the same process for non-incarcerated students. There are some limitations in terms of like having to use certain like, you know, paper applications or specifically with a FAFSA that can be really difficult. Because of the lack of online access, but the application itself is the same. So
I do know that when I went through my security training, that the educator had mentioned that those students in the pilot program, at least at the Orofino facility, had done some initial trainings on what it would be to be a college student. So my understanding is they had done a training on like, this is how you search, that type of thing. But they had mentioned that as we move into the fuller program, that wouldn't be a requirement, because that was part of like, we're picking and choosing those students who work best in this pilot program because we want it to succeed. So we want these to be the students who are striving for the very best at what they can do and get out of the program.
yeah, also adding to that, the prison does not allow anyone to apply that will be released with it in the middle of the semester as well. So there is that criteria. Because the main reason is because we don't want students, you know, sacrificing their time spent, you know, trying to find housing, trying to reestablish social support, trying to get, you know, back out on their feet in the real world and have to sacrifice their grades for that, or vice versa. So.
Right. Another question has come in from the Q&A. Is there any overlap between leisure reading materials and the educational database materials? For instance, are fiction books, say like Lord of the Rings, included in the repository, or is that separate? The system is fascinating. Kudos to you all for putting in this good work.
That's a great question. And that's something that in the library, we amongst ourselves have really talked about, is how can we not only serve the kind of research and educational information needs of students, but also serve kind of their personal research or just leisure reading needs. As of yet, as far as I know, we really don't have a lot of fictional materials within the ecosystem. The only thing that might be there are maybe short stories or poetry if they were associated with required or recommended course readings. But because of, at least for more recent things, some of the copyright restrictions, it's very challenging to make electronic books available within the library ecosystem, since there's really no way to create a link from the safe listed or the offline version of the library ecosystem back to our subscriptions. I think that in the future, there might be an opportunity to look at some fictional resources that are out of copyright, maybe some of the Project Gutenberg information, and make those things available. But right now, for kind of the time it takes for student interns to do that vetting, we saw that it would be significantly more challenging for them to spend the time vetting fictional sources, which might run into some of those issues that IDOC has identified and some of those trigger words, and dedicated the majority of our time so far to making the required and recommended course readings, some of those initial topics of interest, and then the research requests made by students. But if students were to request something that was fiction, or maybe more of a personal research topic that wasn't like a scholarly or peer-reviewed journal, we would do our best to meet that need within the parameters and what we have access to. Do you know, Grace, kind of what the leisure reading situation is like in some of the libraries?
I don't as much. Like, I mean, I've seen the books. I don't know how checking out looks like. I know, like, you know, some facilities you don't necessarily get to choose which book you get. You just kind of get put on a list, and what appears. But that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Got another question that's come in. Are those who are serving life sentences able to take part in the program?
I believe so, but I also don't know if we've had anyone apply that has a life sentence, so I'm not 100% sure on that.
And we've got just about 2 more minutes here, and I think like one more question. Someone asked, is there a possibility of partnering with Idaho public libraries to provide materials?
I don't see why not. I can easily see the same system working for public library materials as long as it meets whatever those copyright requirements are. Since the system exists and Oak Collection Builder is open for everybody to use, I could easily see this transferring to other libraries and have that happening. I do know there are other, like the Lewis and Clark College that is just down south of us is also part of this Pell Grant program. They do different types of classes that we do. So it might be worth talking to them to see what they're providing to their students also. But yeah, I don't see why not public libraries.
Thank you all so much for your presentation. And I think we got through all of our questions with 1 minute to spare. So thanks everyone very much for attending. And I'll throw the link to the survey into chat. You'll probably be getting this every session you go to, but get that in here before we leave. And we've got a short break, and I think the next one begins. There's a 10-minute break. So yes, hopefully see you at the next session as well. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.